Your brand may be staying on top of current trends, but are you agile enough to stay relevant, resilient, and successful as customers, competition, and the world continues to change at a breakneck pace? I'm thrilled to share the newly revised version of my first book, The Agile Brand. I'm calling it The Agile Brand Revisited. It's been updated to reflect our continually changing world, and it provides 7 principles that form the backbone of an agile brand, offering detailed insights and actionable steps for incorporating them into your business strategy. This is the book that started it all, and I'm excited to share it with you. It's now available in print and digital formats and available everywhere. Learn more by going to the Agile Brand Guide website at www.agilebrandguide.com.
How often do you compare yourself to others? It's easy to envy friends' lives on social media when you only see the good parts. But comparison is the thief of joy. Online therapy can help you focus on what you want instead of what others have, because your best life is always better than the idea of someone else's. Stop comparing and start living with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com.
Welcome to Season 5 of the Agile Brand with Greg Kihlström, where we talk with enterprise and technology platform leaders about the people, processes, and platforms that make marketing and customer experience successful, scalable, and sustainable. This is what creates an agile brand. I'm your host, Greg Kihlström, advisor and consultant for Fortune 1000 marketing and CX leaders and teams as principal and chief strategist at GK5A, and best-selling author, keynote speaker, entrepreneur, and Agile certified coach. The Agile Brand podcast is brought to you by TEKsystems, an industry leader in full-stack technology services, talent services, and real-world application. For more information, go to teksystems.com. To sign up for the Agile Brand newsletter and get the latest insights and articles on marketing technology and CX, or to purchase a copy of my latest book, House of the Customer, go to gregkihlström.com. You can also find all my books on Amazon and other retailers. And now on to the show. Welcome to a special episode of the Agile Brand podcast that we call the Agile Brand Guide to Intrapreneurship. While entrepreneurs are often lauded with creating new businesses and new ideas, it is more often the case that change agents working within organizations or intrapreneurs are responsible for innovation and for seeing those new ideas through to completion. The Agile Brand Guide to Intrapreneurship shares stories and insights from leaders within organizations that had the courage to create new ways to move a business forward. Hi, this is Greg, and I'm joined by my co-host, Adam Chen. Adam, you are going to be co-hosting this Intrapreneurship series of episodes throughout the year, so why don't you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Greg. It's wonderful to finally having this happen. We've been talking about entrepreneurship, I think, on and off for a number of years now.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited that you've welcomed me on to be a co-host here for 2023. I am currently president of a SaaS property technology company called Amenity. But throughout my career, I've really fancied myself an innovator, but I've always worked really on client side. You know, as a marketer, first and foremost, and a communicator, many of my peers kind of went the agency route. And I think my experience really working client side has given me a unique insight into the innovation that happens kind of behind the scenes. And I'm really excited to kind of dig into, what it takes and hopefully through my experiences, others can gain some value.
Yeah. Wonderful. Yeah. And you and I go way back, I would say, back to the Carousel 30 Days, my marketing agency. And yeah, it's a former client. And now, I've been working on a number of different things together. And yeah, I'm excited to kick this off. So, in this, our inaugural episode of this Intrapreneurship series, we're going to talk about what it means to be an entrepreneur and even what that term means. And we'll get to that sooner than later. And just why these people, these internal change agents, are such a critical part of businesses today. So why don't we start with the definitions? And Adam, I'll put this to you. How do you define an entrepreneur, and what distinguishes them from just a really good employee?
Yeah, I don't know. Thanks for teeing that up. I think there's a lot of synonyms that get thrown around that, lead into what the definition of entrepreneur is. You just mentioned one, change agents. Change agents are certainly something that's common lexicon, I think, in business. In my intro, I even mentioned innovation. And I think at the core of what an entrepreneur is really who's the innovator? Who's that person that's going to think how to do things differently, right? And that's how businesses move forward. I think entrepreneurship gets all the headlines, especially I think for maybe some of those earlier in their career out there, especially with the pandemic that we've just been through, a lot of people broke out on their own, and started their own thing. And there's certainly appealing, attributes doing so. You're kind of in charge of your own day. You can really drive the ship. You don't have anyone to answer to. Right, but at the core of what an entrepreneur does is really innovating. You're trying to bring something that's maybe a great concept in one vertical and bringing it to another vertical, right? And really transform the world, potentially. So I guess on an entrepreneur, it's, how do you take that same concept but do it within an organization? And it's inherently different because there's a lot more guardrails. And maybe that's a good thing. That could be a detriment too. I think with entrepreneurship, certainly the world's your oyster. The flip side of that is you can easily get distracted. How do you keep your eye on the prize? And especially when you're trying to grow something, and it's really what I'm trying to do now as, within this SaaS startup that we're running. It's challenging to do that on your own. You have to fight for the resources to get some of that stuff. So your focus is a little bit, maybe not so much on the innovation, but more, how am I going to make this a viable business model? How am I going to keep it going? How am I going to afford to hire the people I need that'll help me on this journey? Flip that to now you're within an organization, different challenges, but the end goal is the same. Now you have maybe some of those resources at your disposal, but the flip side is you have a lot more politics you have to play. You don't have that because you're, maybe a lone wolf or a small team, or you're in charge on the entrepreneur side. On the entrepreneur side, you have to play those politics and navigate the environment. Yes, the funding is there, but you have to make the case for that. And maybe how to get the buy-in is a little bit different. If an entrepreneur is talking to a VC firm to try to get funding, that might be a very different type of conversation, than the CFO or the CEO within an organization. And, how do you get that buy-in? So I think it's obviously intuitive to say an entrepreneur is very similar to an entrepreneur, right? And I think what will be very interesting as we continue this conversation and this whole podcast series is really to understand the nuance, between the two, because I think there are certainly different skills needed to be successful. There are certainly transferable skills between the two, but there's definitely some uniqueness there.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, totally, totally agree with what you're saying. But I think you brought up a few kind of categories of things, and we're not going to have time to talk about all of these, but I think it might even give us a framework for what we want to talk about in the months ahead, which is there are certain. And I've seen entrepreneurs become successful intrapreneurs, and vice versa as well, as I'm sure you have as well. But it comes down to a few things. So risk looks very different, intra versus entre. Innovation even looks different. Sometimes there's an entrepreneur, it might be big I innovation versus small I innovation. In a Fortune 50 company, innovation looks very different versus a startup that there's no constraints. And I think constraints is a big one too. Is that constraints can be a good thing and a bad thing. I mean, I actually like having some kind of, even though I've been an entrepreneur, I'm an independent consultant now, I do actually like constraints, and so I work well working in large organizations where I'm kind of vicariously dealing with bureaucracy and constraints and stuff. But some people, they don't want that. They're so limited by that, and their ideas are better for not having that. And then there's some people that just thrive within not even necessarily a challenging environment internally, because not every company is difficult to work in, but they have their established processes, procedures, platforms, all of that kind of stuff. And so an entrepreneur to me is someone who thrives in that and finds ways to be not even, big I innovative within those constraints, as well. Because I think to answer my own question about, what distinguishes from a really good employee, I think a really good employee can do small innovations without being a big change agent and that kind of entrepreneur that I think you and I have been talking about for a while here. I think a true intrapreneur is someone that really finds a way to massively, expand something or do something just brand new with the resources and within the constraints of what's already going on.
Yeah, for sure. And to piggyback, to your point, I guess it's not an entrepreneur isn't just like your Fortune 50 R&D head, right? Like
Right.
it's not somebody that's almost tasked with doing it. It's someone that organically identifies maybe there's some opportunity and right maybe seizes the day and just kind of makes it their own challenge.
Yeah.
Maybe they're intrinsically driven to try to find some of that stuff, and identify where that is. I think what's nice about intrapreneurship versus entrepreneurship, because certainly I've been on both sides of that fence now, is just what you have to focus on. I don't get bogged down with certain things, as an entrepreneur, because certain things will be taken care of. Most organizations will have an accounting department. So maybe you don't have to figure out and define what those SOPs are for revenue collection, right?
Right.
And then you can really focus at the task at hand. And I think so maybe a little bit more narrowly focused, but I think potentially the impact could be much larger, even sometimes in entrepreneurship, right? Because the speed to market, you have the additional resources behind you that maybe you can accelerate some of the rollout of whatever that change was. And then there's existing communication channels. And you said bureaucracy, but bureaucracy can work in your favor too, because there are clearly defined lines and responsibilities within a lot of these organizations that just sometimes don't exist in a, startup or, small entrepreneur-led company.
Yeah. So, we've both played leadership roles in organizations, and there are those employees that, again, really good employees, but they're going to be there for 2-3 years and then move on in their careers. And then there's those people that, there's something special about them and you want to keep them, and they're destined for great things, whether they're in the organization that you're in or not. How do you think a leader should think about that? Are these people, are they threats to that leader? Is there an opportunity for leaders to grow entrepreneurs and, and help the company thrive? Like how should leaders think about that?
I think it takes a certain type of leader. I think that's where it all starts. You mentioned, the potential threat. And I think that in my experience working within large and small organizations, that's probably the biggest hurdle. So many people are driven by ego, perhaps. And I don't necessarily say that with a positive or negative intent. Everyone has an ego to a certain extent, but it gets in the way. And I think it takes a certain self-awareness of that leader to be able to identify and help nurture people along that journey and not see them as a threat. So maybe it's a little bit of confidence too, I think, that goes in there. I guess what I'm kind of ideating around is soft skills. And I hate using the word soft skills, but you need to look for some of these intangible attributes, and I don't think I'm not so, nature oriented versus the nurture. I definitely believe in the growth mindset, but it takes somebody that kind of comes to the table already with that kind of mindset and maybe looks at the organization much more broadly than their own self ambitions. So I think it starts with the leadership team. So imagine I'm a CEO and I'm looking at first, building my leadership team to then foster, innovation in my company or something like that. Before even I try to identify that entrepreneur or that change agent themselves, first I'm trying to create the environment and looking for leaders that can help create that environment where that can thrive.
Yeah.
And then I think once you create the right environment, these entrepreneurs will surface themselves, right? Everyone knows who the rock stars are within their organization. I think the danger is that if you handcuff those rock stars, they're going to look elsewhere. And I think that's even more of a threat today because there's so many more options out there. And I think employees, expectations are a little bit different, and the power is shifted a little bit more of, it's not that I need this job. And if this job isn't aligned with what I want and what I need at this moment in my life, I'm going to go find it elsewhere. So it takes that, again, goes back to that leadership team and the environment that they're able to create so that They foster that, they identify those people, but then they identify how we can retain them and keep them challenged. So you start getting into motivation. What is it that motivates entrepreneurs and change agents at all levels of your organization?
Yeah.
Right. And being able to tailor that so you can bring out the best in people. That, in my experience, is a very rare trait.
Before we continue, let's take a quick break. If you're like many marketing leaders today, you're inundated with a need to improve the customer experience across an increasing number of channels and touch points, all while ensuring your team is performing well, innovating, and continuously improving. So how do you find the time to determine what's next for you, your team, your brand, and your customers? My company, GK5A, can help. Whether it is advisory services, evaluation of marketing technology platforms and solutions, or digital agencies and implementation partners, or assistance with creating strategic roadmaps and prioritization of efforts, we've done it all and served as an ally to Fortune 1000 brands in industries like financial services, healthcare, consumer electronics, professional services, and more. You can learn more about these services and contact us at www.gk5a. That's www.gk5a.com. Now let's get back to the show. To me, what you're talking about kind of describes culture, right? Like there needs to be a culture there where there's room. I've been an employee a few times. It's been a little while, but it's I've been at some organizations where there was actually room for me to like go off and, oh, Greg came up with this crazy idea, let him run with it or whatever. And then I've been at organizations that there isn't room. If you don't, you're paid to do a job and just do it and kind of keep your head down or whatever. And I'm, to me, that part of that is culture. Sometimes, someone is just wildly creative and they just don't, their ideas and just don't fit the organization. I wouldn't call that a fault of the leaders. If your business makes bicycles and you come up with a great pet food idea, like that's great, but it probably doesn't belong in the bicycle company, so that's where you strike out on your own or get a different job. But I mean, I think as long as it kind of fits within the realm of the business, there does need to be room for these people to be able to grow. If not, no one should be surprised that they leave and perhaps go out on their own. And then it kind of comes back to what you were saying earlier, which is to build on that a little bit. I don't think everyone is destined to be an entrepreneur. I think it's not that it's harder to do that than it is to be an intrapreneur or just an employee or whatever it is. I just think that there are certain people that are really good at being entrepreneurs, and some of those people have started 10 companies and all sold all of them and been wildly successful. And then there's other people that are just better suited to that than being an employee. But I think a lot of those people that get disillusioned and think they're entrepreneurs they strike out on their own because they're disillusioned, and then they quickly find out, oh wow, I have to know about. I mean, it's like from my own experience, like starting my marketing agency back in the day. It's like, oh wow, I have to know how to read contracts, and I have to know how to. I'm a web designer, I have to know accounting and HR and all this stuff. So I guess that leads me to one of the other things that I know we wanted to talk about, which is, how do I know if I am an entrepreneur or not? Like what is the makings of that? Not even versus something else, but just, what do you think are some of the characteristics that identify an entrepreneur?
Yeah, it's funny. Until we started talking about this, I would have never called myself an entrepreneur. But in reflection, after many of our conversations, I'm getting much more comfortable. I think defining myself as such. So I'll talk from my lens. I think it's funny. You mentioned the word risk earlier, and I think that's a defining difference, I think, between those entrepreneurs and those intrapreneurs. Certainly risk tolerance. I think striking out on your own and starting your own thing certainly has a certain level of risk associated with it. And not just financial risk, but as you alluded to, knowledge risk. Like maybe I just don't know how to do certain functions that make a business run or, can help bring this new innovation to market or something to that standpoint. But that's not to say that intrapreneurs aren't also are completely risk averse, right? They're also certainly have certain risk tolerances. It's just skinned a little bit differently.
Yeah.
I think myself, I know I've always been, focused on kind of career progression, right? As I've moved from company to company and role to role now to where I'm, president of a company. The risk for me was, do I put my neck out there and threaten this path I've created for myself? So it's maybe, an opportunity cost of like, if I get laid off or this doesn't work out, I can always find another job. There's certainly, that kind of like talk track there, but it's not like I'm personally staking, my home or my car. And, so,
yeah.
And maybe that also creates a little bit more freedom to take some chances too, because, you're not going to be, you're in Maslow's hierarchy, you're still going to have a roof over your head. You still have all this other stuff where if I have a mortgage in my future, for this thing, I've kind of thrown all my eggs into that one basket.
Yeah.
So I think that's one thing, but I do think it's hard to identify because I've seen change agents with very different personas throughout my career. I've seen the quiet folks, that kind of operate through other people and maybe don't beat their chest, right? Yeah. But are just brilliant, and it almost takes somebody else to promote them for people to even understand how impactful that they really were, right? Yeah. But then on the other side, you've got these very charismatic people in your organization that just somehow can rally everyone and, say the right things and kind of bring that stuff to market. So I think the source of the true innovation can take many flavors, but I think collectively it's also about how the intrapreneur can build a team of some sort around them to help roll it out. Yeah. So it takes, whether you have it or not, it takes somebody with a little bit of charisma to operate within that bureaucracy and get this, whether it's the buy-in or the adoption that's necessary, right, to get traction. But it also takes, that person that can lock themselves away and get it all out on paper or code it up or, prove that concept out or whatever that actually does the hard work. So I guess what I'm saying is an intrapreneur is almost, in my experience, never successful by themselves. It's not a one-man army. It's really how successful you can be as a team. So it's, what are those traits, to go back to your question? You need to know how to be a part of a team. And you also maybe need to know how to influence a team, not necessarily be the leader of the team, but influence others. So that's the one skill, is how do you get more than you might be able to produce just on your own, and be aware enough to know where you need to pull in others' help. That also, just like the leadership example we talked about earlier, I think is a rare trait. So when you do find it, you got to keep those people in your organization.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I haven't really thought of this in this way before. I mean, I agree with what you're saying, and yet I know you've been an entrepreneur as well. Like, as an entrepreneur, I can't take credit for, most of the successes that I've had. So in other words, there's a bit of shared, no one ever really does anything. I mean, I'm sure it's happened before and stuff like that, but no one ever truly does something alone. But I do think that there's a nuance that you're describing, as far as maybe it comes back to ego. Maybe it comes back to, well, I want to, put this flag in the ground or whatever, as, this is Greg's thing, and everybody else can rally around Greg's flag or whatever, versus being okay with being part of a larger organization that was there sometimes long before you and will be there long after you, making a big impact in that, and perhaps being, having a conference room or a whatever named after you, or whatever the case may be. But I think maybe it's about how you get satisfaction out of your work or something. This is probably something for further discussion too down the road.
We could go in so many different ways, I'm sure, as we have in the past, I think.
Right.
But no, I guess if I had to sum it all up, it's a certain level of humbleness and selflessness, I think, is the most important thing, because to be, I think, a really successful entrepreneur, right, or the ones that really make the outsized impact, you have to be thinking about the organization probably before yourself.
Yeah.
And I think when I'm talking about, you mentioned culture, absolutely, but from, I guess, a personal attribute standpoint, are you creating a culture where people challenge you? Are you surrounding yourself with diverse thought? And do you intentionally try to facilitate debate?
Yeah.
I think some of those types of things are either the leader that's finding the entrepreneur or the entrepreneur themselves need to embody. There are certainly those organizations out there that, it is because there is a genius there and everyone kind of falls in line and like piggybacks off that. And I think the more that culture persists, the less people are willing to speak up, which means you're fostering maybe less diverse thought, which might down the road lead to less innovation for the company. And to build an organization that's so contingent on whether it's a small group or one person's thoughts, I think that's what, lays the sets the stage, I guess, for long-term success. And I think that's what we're ultimately talking about, is how do you build a more sustainable organization, or an organization that continuously fosters entrepreneurship or innovation and things of that sort. So being able to have that long-term vision and understand how you can make it sustainable versus just, I need to meet this one metric, or, you've got that one leader that's just looking in for themselves or their stock package or, their exit strategy.
Yeah.
I think all those things really contribute to that environment and that culture where entrepreneurship can thrive or not.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. So we're almost at the top of the show here, and on the Agile Brand shows, I always ask guests for a piece of advice. I'll answer first, and I'll let you have the last word here. But
yeah.
My question to both of us really is, what's a piece of advice for that person that's listening to this, saying, yeah, like this is me. What should I do? So, my advice to them would be to really, we can't know the future, and we can't necessarily know how chains of decisions and requests are going to go, but try to envision, could you imagine yourself growing something significant where you currently are? And if that's so, not just can you from a culture perspective, but can you personally deal with, because entrepreneurship has its set of challenges, but you're going to get rejection, you're going to get a bruised ego, you're going to fail. There all of those things, there are differences and risks, as Adam, as you were saying. But I would just say, really try to envision that, and if you can do that where you are, then go for it, and hopefully have the support of leadership. What do you think?
Yeah, real quick follow-up question, I guess, before I answer. What else do you think we're going to get out of the, some of these subsequent interviews in this show? We'll obviously dig into some of this stuff, but from the varying what are the varying perspectives, I guess, on this that you're most interested in kind of unearthing? I mean, we can talk all day, but really, we got to bring in some other thought here and really put some definition around what entrepreneurship is.
Yeah, I think I would love to know what the bounds are of, when does someone actually become almost an entrepreneur, even, as a spinoff of an organization. You can be so successful as an entrepreneur that they create a whole new division or company or whatever, but like, where are the bounds of where we see, an entrepreneur or a change agent? I think we're kind of using those terms interchangeably. That would be one thing that would be fascinating to me, as well as just what are the cultural, how is the kind of culture that allows this and allows this to thrive? How can that be defined so that others can, leaders listening to this, because there's plenty of leaders out there listening to this show. There's plenty of employees and aspiring leaders listening to this show. Like, what are those hallmarks that they can look for to say, okay, yeah, I'm in the right place. I just need to put a proposal together, or whatever the case may be. And that might be the third thing, is just like, what does that look like? Do you like get your boss and like write a 1-page proposal of like, I got this idea. What would it take to do that? What does it look like to actually take the first step to becoming one. So I mean, any of those three, I'd love to talk about.
Interesting. Yeah. I like that. That helps me kind of think through. I like how you say with the bounds, and I guess that makes me think about where we spent a lot of time today talking about, maybe what differentiates an entrepreneur, but maybe what we can also do is explore, in what ways that they're similar. And I think that's the advice I would give out to people is don't get hung up so much on the word, right? There are some intrinsic motivations that you have to do good and change the world for the better and bring innovation to market, right? Really, the only difference between entrepreneurship, I guess, at the highest level is its context. Are you doing it on your own, or are you doing it within an organization? And both of those, have certainly some other things to unpack there. But my advice to people is if you're fancy yourself an entrepreneur or this type of stuff, you've always had a dream of starting your own thing, first take a look at where you're at. Just because you're working in an organization does not prevent you from innovating on some really cool idea or taking it to the next level or coming up with some brand new concept. The grass isn't always greener, so let's first not give up everything that maybe we've worked for thus far. You don't have to do 180 degrees on whatever career path you've charted, right? It might just be a small left turn. So there's a lot more available than I think people sometimes realize.
Yeah, love it. Well, thanks everybody for listening to this special episode of the Agile Brand podcast we call the Agile Brand Guide to Intrapreneurship. Adam and I will be returning here pretty soon. So yeah, looking forward to it. Thanks again.
Thanks.
Thanks again for listening to the Agile Brand with Greg Kihlström podcast, brought to you by Tech Systems. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to subscribe on your podcast channel of choice and leave us a rating so that others can find the show more easily. You can access more episodes of the show at www.gregkihlström.com. That's GREGKIHLSTROM.com. To get a copy of my latest book, House of the Customer, visit my website, or you can find it on Amazon or other retailers. The Agile Brand is produced by Missing Link, a Latina-owned, strategy-driven, creatively fueled production co-op. From ideation to creation, they craft human connections through intelligent, engaging, and informative content. Until next time, stay agile.